Have it now. So, we're going to talk tonight. We spent the last 4 weeks talking about the Heart Sutra. Somebody's not on mute. Ken, I think that's you. Um, we spent the last 4 weeks talking about the Heart Sutra, and while doing so, I pulled a couple of stories out of the Vimalakirti Sutra and out of the Lotus Sutra. So those inspired me to do something, and I pulled this book out that I started reading. It's a contemporary book, relatively contemporary book of Koans featuring female ancestors, and those stories all show up in here. It's like, So these are all Koans, and the purpose of this is not so much to go over old Koan stories, although these are like modern versions of them, but Koan practice can actually be a very fresh, current practice for us today. So just a little bit about Koans, and where I'm headed with this, and then I'll go through these stories. Historically, in the dim and distant past, studying in Tang Dynasty China, the monks there were pithy little exchanges, and monks would write them down on the sleeves of their little robes and save them all up. And these were pithy exchanges between mostly realized individuals that pointed at the truth that is beyond words. So they were using words to point at the truth beyond words, and they're kind of testing each other. And they get handed down to us because they are these very compact, kind of esoteric little things that point at that which is beyond words. That which is beyond words is that out of which everything within words and everything we experience comes. So it's a single point, it's very simple, and yet it contains everything. So pointing at it isn't just a single pointing, it's got many flavors, many characteristics, etc. So there are many different ways of pointing at it. So there's a whole arsenal of koans, and different traditions have different numbers of them, but they're all pointing at different aspects. So lots of different ways you can do this in different traditions. The Rinzai tradition really takes this as a core practice. The Koreans use koans. I forget the word they use for koans. They have a different word, but it's basically the same thing. And they have a practice which is very similar to the Rinzai one. Soto Zen, they're not used in the same kind of contemplative way, but they're used very deeply. Dogen, who was the founder of Zen, Soto Zen as we know it, his masterwork, Shobogenzo, to me, is it's a mixture of Lotus Sutra and Koan commentary. I mean, he lived in these things. So we can take our personal life questions, we can find something that is an obstacle, something that is a challenge to us, and we can bring that and hold that in this same kind of way and use this practice of sitting with that question to see the deep answer that may be beyond words. It may answer itself as a question, as a simple answer. It may take us deeper, or it may just dissolve. But there's something in that practice of how to hold the question. Examples over time. Dogen, I think I'm remembering this story approximately correctly. When he was about 7 years old, his mother died. So this is the same Dogen I talked about, who's the founder of Soto Zen. His mother died, and when they were cremating her, as he saw the smoke blowing away, he had this profound question of where she'd gone. It's just like just this deep not knowing, and that became a life question for him that he held in this kind of way. In the Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, who am I? Is kind of a koan. You hold this question. You can't answer it intellectually. You just hold this question and let the question go where it goes. A much more practical one I had, this is, 15 years ago now, maybe more than that. I had a major conflict between a personal commitment. I had a friend coming to visit from overseas, and he was bringing his family, and we'd planned this for years, and then something that showed up at work that just completely conflicted and was unavoidable. So I had this really nasty conflict that came up, and I had no idea what to do with this. Just awful. And I had young kids at the time, which meant resolving it was up here was much more difficult. So I remember I sat with this for a while, but I remember the last day I sat with it, it was like these enormously powerful, heavy thunderclouds came rolling in. And this was just, as I was sitting, and then they kind of went away, and the answer just emerged. It was blindingly simple. It was really obvious. The detail doesn't matter. It's just that in that case, it was an actual action. So this is what I do. This is how I live in this. So we can do this with all sorts of life questions. So the first one I'm going to go to is the goddess and the flowers, which is out of the Vimalakirti Sutra. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the koan, and then I'm just going to give a couple of comments on it, and then we're going to move on through all four and then have some concluding comments. So during the time, as I said, it says India 2nd century, and this was from the Vimalakirti Sutra. During the time of the Buddha, a great congregation of bodhisattvas, celestial beings, and monks were all gathered at layman Vimalakirti's house, debating the teachings together. A goddess was there too, and one day she was so full of joy that she scattered celestial flowers over the whole congregation. The flowers that landed on the bodhisattvas fell to the floor, but those that landed on the monks stuck to them. The monks tried to shake the flowers from their robes, to no avail. The goddess then asked the monk Shariputra, Reverend Shariputra, why are you trying to brush away these flowers? Shariputra replied, because flowers are not proper for religious people. Then the goddess spoke, why shouldn't flowers be proper for religious people? Flowers do not conceptualize or discriminate. You monks are conceptualizing and discriminating. Even though you have renounced your homes for the sake of the Dharma, if you make discriminations, you are not religious. If you make no discriminations, then you are truly religious. Evil spirits have power over the fearful, but cannot disturb the fearless. So those afraid of forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and textures are under the power of the passions that arise from these things. The flowers stick to those who are afraid of them. They fall from the bodies of those who are free from the discriminations that lead to fear. So that's a koan. Right, there's a question in there. And what happens, what we do is there's a whole body in there, which would become like a whole question, a catch phrase or a catchword or a punchline that you'd use to call it to mind would probably emerge out of just being with that question. What comes to me out of this, for me, it would be the celestial flowers. And that would kind of be a trigger. It's a center point, but it's also a trigger to bring to mind the whole question. What is this about? What's going on here? What is it pointing at? What is this pointing at? What element of reality is it pointing at? And it's pointing to me, and this is beyond words, so any attempt to put it in words is going to miss, right? You can't communicate in words. It's described in here. It's the tendency to objectify the human. So it's pointing at that which is beyond objectification. Without objectification, without labeling, without judgment or discrimination, flower petals can't stick. How could they stick? They can't. And then we can get into, well, there's no flower petals and there's no sticking, and you can dig into that a bit more. But the core of it is they can't stick. So it's getting to that place of experience by sitting with the question where this place of not sticking spontaneously emerges and is intuitively understood. So let's move on to the next one. The Naga Princess, 237. So this one is out of the Lotus Sutra. And I won't go through the backstory because there is a backstory to each of these, which is the context. But what happens with these koans is they're taken out of context, so they become like standalone. So for our personal koan, this question of Dogen's about where does my mother go? The context of his mother's death and his life with his mother and all of that is no longer what the question is about. It's the smoke. It's this life force. Where's it gone? When the Bodhisattva Manjushri returned to the Buddha's assembly after visiting the Nagas who lived under the ocean, he praised the wisdom of the 8-year-old Naga princess. He said that she loves all beings as herself and is capable of realizing the enlightenment of the Buddhas. Another Bodhisattva asked, the Buddha himself spent thousands of lifetimes of practice before enlightenment. How could an 8-year-old girl realize enlightenment? Then the princess appeared before the Buddha and his assembly. The Buddha's disciple Shariputra explained to her that it was not possible for her to realize enlightenment because she had the body and obstacles of a woman. The princess had a precious jewel, which she presented to the Buddha. She said, the jewel which I give to the Buddha was quickly received, wasn't it? And the assembly agreed. She said, now I will attain Buddhahood even more quickly. In that very instant, she became a male bodhisattva, carried out all the practices of a bodhisattva, walked to the foot of the Bodhi tree, was completely enlightened, and began teaching the Dharma to beings throughout the universe. Again, there's a whole core in there. The reason it showed up in this book is because the protagonist is a woman, right? I mean, they're Koans that are selected to bring female ancestors into the tradition. The reason I landed on this story is because it's one of 4 in here that have to do with Shariputra, 3 of which I used before, where Shariputra was set up as the dolt, which he is right here, right? But this story is actually about neither of those things. So taking it out of context, what comes out as the heart of this? If I'm to pick one thing that I'm going to anchor this story on, it's going to be the 8-year-old girl realizing, just the 8-year-old girl. And what is this about? There's Manjushri placing great trust in her. The way he introduces her, placed great trust in this 8-year-old girl. And then she presents the jewel to the Buddha, who receives it. The jewel is a symbol of purity and wisdom and containing the universe. It's Indra's net in the jewel, right? So the Buddha has that same relationship. So there's this 8-year-old girl, 8 years old. So perhaps what this is pointing at is beginner's mind, is the wonder and the freshness of youth, of newness, of innocence, and of a Buddha nature which was already there. She didn't have to do anything. She's 8 years old. She hasn't had time to do anything, right? It's already there. So again, this is beyond words. We can't really describe it. But what happens when that understanding emerges spontaneously, and this is, if you read about these hardcore Koan practice traditions, what happens is there's a regular interview with the teacher where the student goes in and presents their answer. Well, if there is a deep intuitive answer that's emerged, the student will express that in action or in words in some kind of spontaneous manner. And that spontaneity and freshness will be what communicates to the teacher the understanding, not so much the words, it's everything around the words. How the words, it's like where the words come from, how they're expressed, where the action comes from. All right, so the next one is, this is...
So, Gareth, in the one you just read, did the little girl give the jewel to the Buddha before Shariputra said that, what he said? Or
no, after.
It was after.
Okay. And this is a great book. I'd recommend it. It really is. Okay, so now we're going to do the Goddesses' Transformations, page 207, which is also out of the Vimalakirti Sutra. And this then, in the sutra, it goes on, and there's a really lovely passage that goes on for about 2 or 3 pages after this. But we're just going to stick with the transformations. A goddess met the Arhat Shariputra, and they began to converse. He was impressed with her great wisdom, but he wondered why she continued to be female, since surely being male would be preferable. He asked, "Why don't you transform yourself out of your female state?" The goddess said, "I have looked for the innate characteristics of the female form to no avail. How can I change them? If a magician created the illusion of a woman, would you ask her, 'Why don't you transform yourself out of your female state?'" Shariputra replied, "No, such a woman would not really exist, so what would there be to transform?" She said, "Just so. All things do not really exist, so how can you ask something that doesn't really exist to change its form?" Then the goddess, by supernatural power, changed Shariputra into a likeness of herself and changed herself into a likeness of Shariputra and asked, "Why don't you transform yourself out of your female form?" Shariputra cried, "I no longer appear in the form of a male. My body's changed into a female body. I don't know what to transform." She replied, "Just as you are not really a woman, but appear to be female in form, all women appear to be female in form, but are not really women. Therefore, the Buddha said that all beings are not really men or women." Then she changed Shariputra back into his own form and asked, "And where is your female form now?" So what's that about? Where I would land on is, where is your female form now? And I could reduce that to where is your form now, but I actually like staying in this sack of skin and bones. Where is your female form now? It's not apparent. Where is it now? I'm reminded of another story out of the Zen tradition where Hoike, who was one of the students of Bodhidharma, he went, knocked on the master's door, and he tried to get him to take him on as a student, and he wasn't interested. He stood out in the snow for a long time. Eventually he saw Hoike, and Hoike said, "I can't calm my mind. Please calm my, oh master, please calm my mind for me." And the master said, "Bring me your mind, and I will calm it for you." Hoike said, "Okay." So he went off. He came back sometime later. It could have been days, could have been years, I don't know. And he said, "I can't find my mind." "There, I've calmed it for you." Where is it now? So again, you can't answer that question, but it points to me, this is pointing at a way of examination, a way of exploration, and it's a way we can take our own answerable questions and also unanswerable questions. Knowing whether they're answerable or not isn't really what's important. It's a question. How do we bring wisdom to bear on this question? We let the question in, we create space for it, and we just hold it carefully and tenderly, without poking at it, just using something, some reference point to know that it's there. So I'm going to read the last one, in which I'm pleased to say Shariputra is not adult. So very generously in this one, he's actually got a little bit of smarts. And of course he had a lot of smarts because he was first in wisdom in the Buddha's time. All right, Bhada Kundalakesa was a wandering Jain ascetic famous for her debating skills. Whenever she came to a new place, she set a branch of a rose apple in the ground and put out the word that whoever wished to debate her should trample the branch. Trample the branch. When she was 70 years old, she came to Savatthi, and Buddha's disciple Shariputra came forward to engage her in a public debate. First, she asked a series of philosophical questions of Shariputra, and he was able to answer all of them. Then he said, "You have asked many questions. I would like to ask you only one." She said, "Please ask, Venerable One." He asked, "One? What's that?" She was unable to answer. He said, "If you don't even know that, how could you know anything else?" And began to teach her the Dharma. She was so moved by the teachings that she fell at his feet and asked to take refuge with him, but instead he told her to come and meet the Buddha. The Buddha recognized her spiritual maturity and said to her, "One phrase that brings peace is better than 1,000 words that have no use." When she heard these words, she was freed and became an arhat. And then the Buddha ordained her, simply saying, "Bada, come." So what's that one about? I would like to ask only one. Please ask Venerable One. One, what is that? What is it? What is it? One, what is it? Something interesting, there's a couple of things here. So one, something interesting here is that was enough to hook Bada, but it didn't yet crack the jar open. There wasn't this explosive insight. There was cultivation when she spent time with Shariputra being taught, hearing the Dharma, and then she went to see the Buddha. And it was when the Buddha said, one phrase that brings peace, or words to that effect. What was it he said? One phrase that brings peace is better than 1,000 words that have no use. And that's what broke it open. That's where this insight emerged. But it was this question that she was holding, this question of one, what is that? And now we have that question. Another koan that reminds me of is, I can't remember the whole story, but the punchline is along the lines of, all things return to the one. What does the one return to? Can't answer it, right? But the question, hold in the question. So again, the reason I brought these up and I went through this exercise of looking at these koans, it was stimulated by the stories as we were going through some of the exploration around the edges of the Heart Sutra. But it's the way that this practice of holding a question in the frame of some of these Zen questions, these koan questions, holding that question and finding a way to just make space for that question and hold that question and let it explore itself. You're on the edge, right? But your conscious awareness is on the edge, but there's subconscious, there's whatever. The question's kind of exploring itself and just trusting that and letting it happen. It's just really a powerful practice.